Listen, if you're a driven, high-achieving person, your resume probably looks absolutely incredible. You're highly capable, you're meticulously organized, and honestly, everyone just relies on you. But privately, do you ever struggle with this persistent, invisible sense of emptiness, like a nagging fear of rejection that just won't quit no matter how much you achieve? Well, today, we're going to unpack exactly why that happens and, more importantly, how to actually heal it.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the invisible emotional wound, then explore why rejection actually hurts, move on to the trap of self-silencing, look at distorted thoughts and attachment, and finally, lay out a roadmap to healing.
Part 1. The invisible emotional wound. Outward success versus inward emptiness.
To start, we really need to validate a very painful paradox that so many successful people-pleasers face. Why do we feel completely empty when life looks totally perfect? You might have the big promotion, the pristine house, the glowing performance reviews, but all those external accolades, they only ever provide a fleeting relief. That confusing void of achievement almost always traces back to a very specific, totally invisible wound from your past. Emily Dickinson actually captured this beautifully. I felt a cleaving in my mind as if my brain had split. I tried to match it, seam by seam, but could not make it fit. That poetically nails the emotional disconnect that happens when your internal landscape is just ignored for way too long. You function, right? You match things up seam by seam in your professional life. But inside, there's just this blankness, a void that you simply cannot make fit with the reality of all your outward success.
So the crucial point is that this void stems from something called childhood emotional neglect, or CEN. And here's the thing, this isn't about overt abuse. It's actually defined by what didn't happen. It's the consistent failure of a parent to notice or respond to your emotional experience. Because a developing brain literally requires attuned interaction to build its capacity for emotion regulation. This absence leaves a profound invisible wound. You end up telling yourself, well, nothing bad happened to me, completely missing the fact that the crucial emotional mirroring you desperately needed simply wasn't there.
And that leads us directly to alexithymia. It's a Greek term meaning without words for feelings. When a child's emotions are constantly met with just a blank stare, the brain adapts by prioritizing survival. It just suppresses those emotional signals. You literally lose the words for your own feelings. Now, as adults, this is often misread by others as emotional strength or maybe being highly analytical. But actually, scratch that. It's not a character strength at all. It's an adaptive survival response to an emotionally unresponsive environment.
Moving to part 2, why rejection actually hurts. Let's look at the evolutionary biology of exclusion.
Because we were emotionally neglected, our fear of rejection is often dialed up to the absolute maximum. And there is a wild evolutionary reason for this. Rejection doesn't just hurt your feelings. It literally activates the anterior cingulate cortex. That's the exact same part of your brain that processes physical pain. You see, exclusion was a literal death sentence for our ancestors, so we evolved this early warning system that stings so badly. Studies showed taking a physical painkiller, like literally popping a Tylenol, can actually reduce the psychological pain of a breakup or a snub. No way, right?
And this brilliantly illustrates just how hardwired that pain is, the cyberball experiment. Researchers set up a simple computer game where a subject plays catch with two strangers. Eventually, the strangers just stop throwing the ball to the subject. The emotional pain reported by the subjects was massive. But here is the craziest part. The pain remained exactly the same even when researchers told the subject the strangers were members of a despised group like the Ku Klux Klan, or even when the ball was swapped for a ticking cyber bomb. Rejection simply hurts, period. Logic has absolutely nothing to do with it.
All right, part 3, the trap of self-silencing, losing the true self. To avoid triggering that ancient, painful alarm system of rejection, a lot of us fall into a chronic trap, the fawn trauma response. Now, we all know fight, flight, and freeze for sure, but fawning is when you automatically appease others to keep the peace. You become agreeable, you become helpful, and you make yourself small. It's a survival strategy you likely developed in childhood to manage unpredictable caregivers, and your nervous system still uses it today. It's what makes you apologize when you've done literally nothing wrong, just to neutralize a perceived threat.
This fawning creates a pretty tragic split. Psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott famously conceptualized this as the false self versus the true self. You present this false self to the world, cheerful, hyper-independent, professionally perfect. And here's the real kicker. High-stakes professional cultures actually reward this false self. They'll praise your emotional numbness and call it focus. Meanwhile, your true self, the part of you that has very real needs, fears, and a profound desire for connection and safety, remains entirely buried.
Part 4. Distorted Thoughts and Attachment. Let's talk about the inner critic.
So, how exactly does our childhood dictate our inner critic today? Well, it all starts with attachment styles. If you developed a secure attachment, a perceived rejection hurts, sure, but it doesn't completely shatter your self-worth. However, if your childhood neglect resulted in an anxious attachment, you might cling and crave reassurance the second someone pulls away. Avoidant types will do the exact opposite. They'll withdraw emotionally to protect themselves. And disorganized types, they will chaotically crave closeness while being utterly terrified of it at the exact same time.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we can take that harsh inner critic and actually rewire it using cognitive behavioral therapy. Let's say a friend doesn't text you back. A cognitive distortion will immediately make you assume, they hate me. That negative thought creates intense anxiety, which then causes you to withdraw. But if you catch that thought and ask for the facts, you might restructure it to, hey, they are likely just busy. That positive thought leads to a sense of calmness, which allows you to simply follow up later without the drama.
And that brings us to part 5, a roadmap to healing, practical tools to finally reclaim your voice.
Now that we've uncovered these invisible trauma responses, let's pivot to a highly structured roadmap to actually heal. The absolute baseline required for building emotional resilience is regulating your physical body. You cannot think your way out of trauma if your body is literally running on fumes. This is the DBT PLEASE acronym. Treat physical illnesses, eat balanced meals, avoid mood-altering substances, get balanced sleep, and exercise daily. It sounds basic, but taking care of your physical well-being is the non-negotiable foundation for managing intense emotional triggers.
Let's move to and see how this builds through the clinical phases of recovering from childhood emotional neglect. Once your physical baseline is secure, you start phase 1, recognition and naming. This is literally building an emotional vocabulary to combat your alexithymia. Phase 2 is practicing the terrifying act of allowing others to see your needs through low-stakes experiments. And finally, phase 3 is integration and grieving. You have to mourn what family therapist Pauline Boss calls ambiguous loss. You're basically grieving the consistent emotional safety and connection that you simply never had.
Alongside that deeper work, psychologist Dr. Guy Winch offers 3 fantastic immediate steps for overcoming the sting of rejection. First, do not tolerate self-criticism. You must actively argue with your inner critic. Second, recover your self-worth by writing down affirmations of your valuable qualities. And third, immediately restore feelings of social connection. Honestly, if one friend cancels plans, call another one right away. It reminds your ancient panicking brain that you are still a valued part of the tribe.
Which brings us to our final point, and really the most important question for you to consider today. Now that you understand the invisible wounds of neglect, the literal biological pain of rejection, and this exhausting trap of self-silencing, what's it going to be? Will you continue to perform endlessly as your capable but totally hollow false self? Or will you take the first brave step to apply these tools, honor your true self, and finally step out of your invisible emotional cage? The choice is absolutely yours.